The room was quiet, but the tension was loud. Michael Jai White walked in with the confidence of a man who had spent his entire life in combat, on screen and off it. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply carried himself like someone who knew exactly what he was capable of. Around him, people felt it immediately. The way he stood, the way he scanned the room, the way his presence seemed to take up more space than it should have. Then there was Steven Seagal. Seagal was already there, relaxed, almost bored, leaning back as if nothing in the world could surprise him anymore. He had the reputation, the stories, the aura. People whispered about him the same way they whispered about storms. Unpredictable, destructive, and best observed from a distance. He didn't look up right away. He didn't need to. What happened next would become one of the most talked about unspoken confrontations in martial arts history. And most people still don't understand what was really going on. Michael Jai White didn't come from hype. He came from discipline, from hours spent in silence, drilling movements until they became instinct. Karate, Taekwondo, Shotokan, Kyokushin, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, Muay Thai. He wasn't a dabbler. He was a lifelong student of violence, controlled, refined, precise. His size alone was intimidating, but it was the calm behind his eyes that made people nervous. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, was something different. He wasn't built on speed or flash. He was built on dominance. Aikido dominance. Control of balance. Control of space. Control of the moment someone decided to step too close. His entire philosophy revolved around one idea. In the fight before it becomes a fight. No wasted motion. No warning. No second chances. And that's where the danger was. Because Michael Jai White didn't walk into that room thinking he was meeting a movie star. He walked in thinking he was meeting another fighter. The problem was, Steven Seagal wasn't just another fighter. The tension didn't explode. It didn't need to. That's what made it worse. Michael Jai White's posture was open, but not friendly. His tone was controlled, but sharp. There was a challenge in the air, not spoken, but clearly understood. In the martial arts world, there's a language beyond words. Eye contact, distance, breathing, timing. Both men were speaking it fluently. White was known for being direct. If he had a problem, he addressed it. He didn't posture for cameras. He didn't play games. He believed in testing reality. And in that moment, it was clear he wanted to see if Steven Seagal was real. Steven Seagal didn't rise to it. He didn't square up. He didn't threaten. He didn't even change his expression. Instead, he did something far more unsettling. He stayed relaxed. That alone sent a signal. Because experienced fighters know something beginners don't. When someone is truly dangerous, they don't rush. They don't flare up. They don't need to prove anything. They wait. They let you make the first mistake. And Michael Jai White noticed. For a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. People nearby sensed it too. Conversations quieted. Eyes shifted. Everyone understood that if this went wrong, it would go wrong fast. Michael Jai White was powerful, explosive, and technically sound. If a fight broke out, it wouldn't be clean. It wouldn't be pretty. It would be violent. But Steven Seagal had built his entire career, and much of his mystique, on dealing with exactly that kind of aggression. Seagal's style wasn't about trading blows. It was about angles, leverage, using an opponent's intent against them. The moment someone reached, stepped, or lunged, that was the opening. And once you were off balance, the fight was already over. White shifted slightly. Not forward. Not back. Just enough to test the space. Seagal didn't move. That was the answer. Michael Jai White later admitted something that surprised a lot of people. He said that in that moment, he realized Steven Seagal was not someone to take lightly. Not someone you could bully. Not someone you could rush. Because there was no fear coming back at him. Only readiness. And that changed everything. The truth is, Michael Jai White had nothing to prove. His career spoke for itself. He had trained with the best. He had tested himself repeatedly. But fighters are human. And when reputations collide, curiosity becomes temptation. What if is a dangerous question. What if the stories are exaggerated? What if the myth doesn't hold up? What if this is just another actor playing tough? That question never got answered that day. Because Steven Seagal didn't give him the chance. Instead of escalating, Seagal diffused the moment with words. Casual, almost dismissive, but not disrespectful. Enough to end the tension without feeding it. Enough to make it clear that if something happened, it would be on his terms. And Michael Jai White backed off. Not out of fear, out of respect. That's the part people miss. In the martial arts world, backing off isn't weakness. It's intelligence. It's recognizing when a situation has consequences that outweigh the ego boost of winning. Especially when both men knew there would be no referees, no rules, no resets. If that confrontation had turned physical, it wouldn't have been a movie fight. It would have been ugly, fast, and possibly permanent. White understood that. Seagal understood that. And everyone else in the room was grateful neither man needed to prove it. What makes this story so compelling isn't who would have won. That debate will never end. Styles make fights. Circumstances matter. Timing matters. Anything can happen. What makes it compelling is the psychology. Two alphas. Two reputations. One moment where ego could have taken over. And it didn't. Michael Jai White later spoke openly about it. He didn't diminish Seagal. He didn't mock him. He didn't claim superiority. Instead, he acknowledged the danger. He acknowledged the skill. He acknowledged that Steven Seagal was not someone to play with. That alone says everything. Because real fighters don't. Years later, when Michael Jai White reflected on that moment, he didn't frame it as a clash of egos. He framed it as recognition. The kind that only comes when two people understand exactly what violence costs. He made it clear that what stopped the situation wasn't fear or intimidation, it was awareness. Awareness that once lines are crossed, there is no rewind button. That distinction matters. Because Hollywood sells the fantasy that fights are reversible, that you can get knocked down, stand back up, dust yourself off, and walk away. Real fighters know better. Real fighters know that a single mistake can mean a broken neck, a shattered joint, or something far worse. And when two men with that knowledge stand across from each other, the rules are different. That's why the silence in that room was heavier than any shouted threat could have been. Michael Jai White wasn't unfamiliar with intimidation. He had been tested countless times, by insecure men, by loud men, by men who needed to prove something. Most of those situations ended quickly, because intimidation only works when the other person believes it. White had spent too much time in real training halls, real sparring sessions, and real combat environments to be shaken by posturing. But Steven Seagal wasn't posturing. That was the difference. Seagal's stillness wasn't passive. It was deliberate. His posture wasn't casual, it was balanced. His eyes weren't bored, they were tracking. Every experienced martial artist recognizes that state immediately. It's the state of someone who doesn't need to prepare because they're already prepared. White noticed that. And in that instant, curiosity turned into calculation. Because Michael Jai White is many things, but reckless isn't one of them. People often underestimate how much restraint it takes to walk away from a potential fight, especially when pride is involved. Especially when reputations are on the line. Especially when everyone in the room is watching, waiting to see who blinks first. White blinked, not because he was weak, but because he was smart. Steven Seagal didn't pursue the moment. He didn't press the advantage. He didn't try to dominate socially or physically. He let the tension dissolve on its own, the same way a seasoned predator lets prey wander away rather than risk unnecessary injury. That's a mindset forged over decades. Long before Hollywood, Seagal had immersed himself in traditional Aikido environments where humility was not optional, where ego was punished, where control was valued over destruction. His philosophy had always been about neutralizing threats with minimal effort, not proving superiority through brute force. And Michael Jai White understood that philosophy instinctively. In later interviews, White made it clear that people who laugh at Seagal's real-world abilities are usually people who have never been in a room with someone truly dangerous. They judge based on appearances, on gossip, on internet narratives. Fighters judge based on energy, posture, timing, and intent. White judged correctly. What's fascinating is how this story grew precisely because nothing happened. That moment became a quiet reference point for Michael Jai White moving forward. Not something he bragged about. Not something he replayed for attention. Just a reminder that there are levels to this world. Levels that don't reveal themselves through noise, but through restraint. Hollywood often confuses aggression with dominance. Loud voices, big gestures, threats delivered for effect. But the men who have spent decades refining combat understand a different truth. Real dominance is calm. Real danger doesn't rush. And the people who truly know how to hurt someone don't feel the need to demonstrate it. Steven Seagal embodied that in ways that unsettled people. It wasn't his size. It wasn't his age. It was his refusal to engage in the expected ritual of intimidation. Most confrontations follow a script: escalation, posturing, verbal sparring, then action. Seagal skipped the script entirely. He existed outside of it. And that alone forced White to reassess the situation in real time. Because fighters don't fear strength. They fear unpredictability. Michael Jai White had trained against champions, against specialists, against men who excelled in one domain or another. But what stood in front of him that day wasn't a specialist. It was someone who had built an entire system around controlling chaos itself. Someone whose art wasn't about winning exchanges, but ending situations. And that's a frightening thing to recognize. People who analyze this story from the outside tend to frame it as a test of masculinity or ego. But that interpretation comes from people who have never been responsible for the consequences of violence. Those who have know that the real test is judgment, knowing when to step forward and when to step away. Michael Jai White chose correctly. What's rarely mentioned is how close this moment came to spiraling. The tension wasn't imagined. It wasn't exaggerated. Others in the room felt it. They saw it in the way White stood, in the way Seagal remained still, in the way both men subtly adjusted their positions without ever acknowledging it. That's not acting. That's instinct. And instinct only comes from experience. Steven Seagal's experience came from years of training in environments where mistakes were punished brutally, where balance was everything, where overconfidence was a liability. His approach wasn't flashy because it didn't need to be. It was designed for reality, not spectacle. Michael Jai White recognized that difference immediately, and that recognition defused the situation faster than any words could have. Later on, when White spoke about the encounter, his tone wasn't dismissive or defensive. It was measured, almost respectful. He acknowledged that whatever people thought about Seagal's public image, there was something very real beneath it. Something that didn't announce itself, but was impossible to ignore once you sensed it. That acknowledgement carried weight. Because Michael Jai White isn't known for inflating myths. He's known for honesty within the martial arts community. When he says someone is dangerous, people listen. Not because he's selling a story, but because he has no reason to. That's why this encounter continues to circulate. Not because of drama, but because of credibility. Two men, one moment, no violence. And yet, the tension lingers years later. It serves as a reminder that the most meaningful confrontations don't end with broken bones or viral clips. They end with mutual understanding, with the silent agreement that some knowledge doesn't need to be tested. Because once tested, it can't be undone. And both Michael Jai White and Steven Seagal understood that perfectly. There's a reason stories like this resonate long after the moment has passed. They pull back the curtain on something most people never experience. The reality behind controlled violence. Not the cinematic version. Not the exaggerated myths. The real thing. The kind that sits quietly in a room and dares you to misunderstand it. Michael Jai White didn't misunderstand it. As time went on, he continued to refine his craft, not just as an actor, but as a martial artist. He trained, taught, mentored, and in doing so, he reinforced the very lesson that encounter had highlighted. Skill without judgment is a liability. Strength without restraint is dangerous to everyone involved, including the person who possesses it. That philosophy shaped the way White approached everything afterward. On set, in training halls, in conversations with other fighters. He never chased validation. He never felt the need to measure himself against others publicly. Because once you've stood across from someone who could change your life in seconds, you gain perspective. Steven Seagal, meanwhile, remained an enigma. People debated him endlessly, questioned his past, mocked his later appearances. But those debates rarely included the voices that mattered most, the ones who had been close enough to feel the gravity of his presence. Those voices told a different story, a quieter story, one built on first-hand experience rather than speculation. And that's where the disconnect lies. The internet rewards confidence, loudness, certainty. It punishes nuance. But real fighters live in nuance. They understand that danger doesn't always look dangerous, that the calmest person in the room is often the one you should be watching most closely. That's what Steven Seagal represented in that moment. And that's why Michael Jai White didn't push. Because pushing would have answered a question neither man needed answered. In many ways, that encounter became a mirror. It reflected back to White everything he had learned up to that point. The value of discipline, the importance of humility, the necessity of control. It reaffirmed that martial arts, at its core, isn't about domination, it's about awareness. Awareness of self, awareness of others, awareness of consequence. That's a lesson few people ever learn the easy way. Most learn it after crossing a line they can't uncross. Michael Jai White didn't need that lesson the hard way. He recognized it in real time. And by doing so, he avoided turning a moment of tension into a lifelong regret. That's why, when people ask him about Steven Seagal, his answers are careful. He doesn't glorify. He doesn't dismiss. He acknowledges. An acknowledgement from someone like White carries more weight than any rumor ever could, because it's rooted in reality. The reality is that violence is not a game. It's not a contest. It's not a story you can rewrite once it's over. It's a door that only opens one way. And both men standing in that room understood exactly what was on the other side. So they let the door remain closed. And in doing so, they demonstrated something far rarer than physical dominance. They demonstrated wisdom. In a world obsessed with proving strength, that choice is what made the moment unforgettable. After that encounter, the story began to take on a life of its own, not because of what happened, but because of what didn't happen. People loved imagining the confrontation. They speculated about who would have won. They argued about style matchups, reach, speed, and technique. Every online forum, every social media thread, every comment section became a battleground for hypothetical outcomes. But the reality was far simpler and far more profound. The fight never occurred, because in the quiet tension of that room, both men understood the unspoken rules, the consequences, the cost of failure. Michael Jai White walked away knowing he had encountered someone truly dangerous, not in hype or reputation, but in essence. And Seagal remained unshaken, having conveyed his capability without needing to strike a blow. This moment, brief and almost invisible to the public, encapsulates the difference between fantasy and reality in martial arts. Hollywood often depicts fights as contests of willpower, theatrics, or flashy moves. The truth, as White experienced, is that real danger is subtle, deliberate, and often silent. The most dangerous fighter isn't always the one who throws the hardest punch. It's the one who controls the room without making a move. White has spoken about this encounter sparingly, emphasizing not fear, but respect. Respect for someone who had mastered his craft to a degree few ever achieve. Respect for someone whose reputation, while widely debated, was anchored in undeniable reality when confronted face to face. And respect, above all, for the wisdom to choose restraint over unnecessary confrontation. For fans, this story became more than a behind-the-scenes anecdote. It became a lesson in humility, control, and understanding the difference between ego and judgment. It illustrated why martial arts is as much about the mind as the body, as much about restraint as it is about skill, as much about timing as it is about strength. The encounter also highlighted a rarely acknowledged truth. Reputation only matters when it is tested. Michael Jai White had trained his entire life, proven himself countless times, and yet in that moment, he encountered someone whose presence alone redefined the parameters of respect. That realization didn't diminish White's own capabilities. It deepened his understanding of martial arts and the code that governs true fighters. Over time, this story has become legendary, not for conflict, but for control, for restraint, for the quiet power of awareness. People continue to debate it, continue to speculate, and continue to be fascinated by it because it touches something primal, the knowledge that true danger exists, often unseen, and that wisdom sometimes means walking away. White's decision to respect that boundary cemented his reputation not just as a fighter, but as a martial artist who understands the full spectrum of skill, discipline, and judgment. And Seagal's measured stillness remains a reminder that sometimes the most powerful action is no action at all. That encounter lives on because it embodies the perfect lesson. Sometimes the real fight is knowing when not to fight. And when two men capable of extraordinary violence both understand that truth, the moment becomes timeless. The tension, the unspoken understanding, the mutual recognition of skill and danger. These are the elements that make the story unforgettable. Not spectacle, not violence, not headlines. Just two fighters, awareness, and the wisdom to let the moment pass without catastrophe. It's a story that continues to inspire, caution, and fascinate. A reminder that in martial arts, as in life, true mastery is measured not only by what you can do, but by what you choose not to do.